there, folks. Thank you so much for joining this week's session of the eLearning Designers Academy Live. My name is Tim Slade, and these sessions are for us to talk to different folks in the industry about where they're at with their careers and lessons they've learned along the way. This week, we're talking with Jim Brown. Jim is a former college professor and academic, and in the last year or so, he's been making the transition into instructional design and e-learning. And I'm so happy to have him here because Jim and I have had the wonderful pleasure of getting to know each other over the last really year or so. And it's just been so great watching his transition. So hi, Jim, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you, Tim, for having me here with you today. And yeah, I'm really excited about this, and I'm really excited about answering questions and just having this conversation.
Yeah. So before we get into some of the lessons you've learned along the way, transitioning out of higher education and academia and into your current transition into instructional design, tell everybody a little bit about yourself and your history, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So I live in Asheville, North Carolina, which is one of the most beautiful places, I think, on the planet. It really is beautiful here, especially with fall leaves and everything. So it's great to live here in Asheville. I'm originally from North Carolina. I am a North Carolina boy, born and bred in the Piedmont area, just north of Charlotte, North Carolina. That's where I grew up. And when I went off to college, I was very active in the arts and in theater. And so I have a BFA in theater and acting and directing. And I, did a lot of professional theater, community theater. But what I really wanted to do was teach. And I knew that about myself, that teaching was an area I wanted to go into. So for about 10 years, I was a elementary and middle school drama teacher. Yes, I've directed Annie about 5 gazillion times. And so I did that. And it was actually during that time when I was teaching theater that I started working here in North Carolina on an arts education school reform movement. And so I started going around and working with this organization, the Keenan Institute for the Arts out of Winston-Salem, and training teachers on how to use theater in their classrooms to teach all kinds of things. And I really loved that experience. I really loved facilitating that and coaching teachers through that. And that's what led me into my doctoral work in curriculum and instruction. And, it's interesting. I initially, when I went into my doctoral program, I thought I was going to go back into public schools, work as a curriculum specialist in the central office, design curriculum, do those sort of things. And that quickly switched. After about a year, I was hired at a university here in Asheville. And so for the past 20 years, I've been on the faculty there as a professor of education, working with training teachers and teacher education and mentoring teachers into the profession. And then the last 5 years of that experience, I moved into administration. I worked in academic affairs. I was the dean of adult and graduate studies for a short period of time. And that's when I began to question, why am I here? That really became sort of that defining moment. Like, when I permanently left the classroom, and I still was teaching when I was in administration, but I was doing a lot more, budgeting and scheduling and recruiting students and managing new programs. And that wasn't me. That wasn't who I wanted to be. That wasn't the right fit for me. I took a wrong turn. And it was really through that experience that got me I went back to, what is it that you truly love to do? What is meaningful work for you? What kind of experiences do you want to have, in your career? I started asking myself those questions. And it was through a lot of work that led me to this aha moment. It really was sort of an aha moment where I went, that's what I've always wanted to do. And I realized that my arts background, because I've designed costumes and scenery and you name it in theater. I've done it all, script writing.
Mm-hmm.
It was through that design part. It was my love for technology and, using web-based tools that I had missed. And it was also getting to know and work with other people who were knowledgeable, and I could learn new things from them. So, it's really fascinating working with subject matter experts who are really passionate about what they know and what they can do, and then how we can help work that into a course they're building or a program they're trying to design. And so when I had this aha moment that all of these things they started to come together, it was like, wow, I should have done this 20 years ago. I mean, it was that aha moment for me.
So let me, before we talk more about that, I have a random question to ask you, because I've noticed this commonality, this common thread through a lot of people who work in our industry who have theater backgrounds. And I have a theater background. I was a big drama geek in middle school and high school, and I was actually majoring in theater for a long time. And I actually wanted to be a theater teacher. That was until I realized how little theater teachers make and how much they work.
That's right. Yes.
But do you have any thoughts on like why a lot of theater people work in this industry, in e-learning, instructional design, or training in general, or education in general?
Yeah, I think that's a really good observation. I think it's because the theater is it is the integration of so many things that happen at once. I mean, it's the integration of the visual arts, it's the integration of literature, it's performance, it's design, it's iteration, like it's constantly going back, like the rehearsal process. It's a lot like your, storyboarding and, developing ideas and then scrapping some things and then going back and saying, let's look at it this way. I mean, that's sort of the rehearsal process.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why it's a natural fit for us, because we like that sort of atmosphere, where we're dealing with literature, graphic design, artistic design, movement, thought, having an experience, thinking about, because as an actor or director, I mean, you're in the moment and you're having that kind of experience. And I think you want to translate that experience for other individuals. And so not to get too philosophical, but just kind of thinking about how, with learning experience, well, the theater is a learning experience. So,
yeah. You're right. Yeah, theater is it's in its own way. It's a mixed multimedia experience. You have the lighting and the sound and what you see on the stage and the set and the script. And you're totally right about that. Yeah, as I think about when I'm creating a video or creating an e-learning course, all of those elements that I loved from theater are there in essence, and it allows me to, scratch that itch that I have.
Yeah, and even when we're working in something like Storyline or Rise, or even working with video editing and putting, I mean, you're sort of working with building that theatrical experience. You're trying to have, it's on the screen. It's not
because your slide is essentially your stage, your set.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
You're right. Yeah,
so
I love that.
That's how I see it.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. I've never asked that anyone, but I've noticed that. I talk to people in the industry, and I find out that people have a background in theater, and that always surprises me.
Yeah.
So take us back to. So I'm curious now, how long were you working in that administrative function in higher ed that made you realize, like how long were you there before you realized you had this epiphany that A, you didn't like what you were doing, and B, what you wanted to be doing? And then what was like your immediate next step? Did you struggle with those feelings for a long time, or did you jump into action? What was that like?
Yeah, it's kind of like, the dripping faucet. Like you don't really know it's an issue.
It just gets louder and louder.
Until it gets louder and louder. It's like, the hum of the refrigerator. It's still humming along the way. And then all of a sudden you realize that, okay, the refrigerator's not working right, or that
Mhm.
faucet needs to get fixed. I'm so tired of listening. That's kind of the experience that I had. Like, I started out thinking that, okay, this is going to be a good transition for me into administration. And the reason why I say that was, prior to moving into the administration, I served as the president of the faculty senate. So I actually worked with, I was kind of the bridge between the faculty and the faculty governance structure and the administration. So I was in this murky sort of world, between the two. And then that's what sort of led me into the administration. But it was that slow drip until there became that moment when I realized, oh, this is not me. This is not what I want. It was that slow drip and then coming to that moment. And that was about 3 years into it, I think.
Oh, wow.
And I just realized, I don't like doing this. And I was also ill prepared for that experience, because I was an academic, teacher coming into this. And then all of a sudden now I'm dealing with, budgets and hiring and HR and scheduling and all those sort of administrative things that I really didn't have any training. And so that's when I realized I don't want to do this anymore. Yeah.
So one thing I experienced, different but similar. So when I got into a leadership role in L&D, I was working as an e-learning designer, doing content creation, being creative, and then I got into a leadership role where I was managing people. I had a very similar epiphany about, I really I hate managing people. I loved the people that I managed, but I really did not enjoy the task of managing people. And one of the things that I really struggled with when trying to figure out what do I do next was having to untangle what my desires were with what I had been taught or thought was expected of somebody who was successful in that career path. And so I'm curious to know, did you experience that? Did you have to untangle because I assume in academia, you moving into administration, moving up that food chain, that's what you were supposed to do, right? That's what everyone around you was doing. That's what it looks like to climb that ladder.
Right.
So did you have to kind of unprogram or detangle or figure out, like, once you realized you wanted to get out of that, was there like a mourning period or identity crisis period? Does that make any sense what I'm asking?
Yeah, no, I totally, I think, well, first of all, I just want to say that for those people that don't know about the academic world, it really is a very different world. Where I did my doctoral program at the University of South Carolina, and somewhere there on the old campus out on a sidewalk, someone had written in the concrete, reality stops here. So I mean, it's a different space. It's a different world. I think that one of the things for me is that once I moved into the administration and I had an administrative title, to a lot of my friends and colleagues who were faculty members, I was now no longer their colleague. I was now their boss.
Yeah.
And that was also difficult for me, especially somebody who's, like myself, who's very feeling based and very, an empathic kind of person. I was like, this, and that was for me one of the revelations, that when I realized, because I like you, I didn't like managing people. I just wanted to be responsible for me and the work that I was doing. Now I was responsible for, faculty, adjunct faculty, students, managing a building. We had a off-campus site that I would have to manage, and so it was all of that coming together that I realized, this is not who I am. This is not me. I'm not being true to myself and where I want to go, or what I need for myself. I felt like, and I think, and this is something that may come up later, and we've talked about this because in my interview I talked about, I worked with a lot of takers. My leaving experience was a lot of taking, not a lot of giving. I
Sure.
didn't feel like there were individuals who were willing to give to me, like willing to sit down and say, "Hey, let's think about this." Or, it was, you're my boss. You're now somebody that I'm going to wrestle with because I want to get what I want, not what
Hmm.
you want. And so those power struggles, and like I said, reality stops stops here. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, okay, so one of the things that you and I've talked about, and I've talked about this with other people here in these sessions in the past, is the concept that what you're what what you're running from and what you're running towards. Uh, there's a big difference between the two, and what you're running towards has to be greater than the disdain of whatever it is you're running from. If all you're doing is running from something, then if that's your priority rather than trying to figure out what you're running towards, then you're not going to be successful in whatever that is that you're running towards, because you're
Right.
just more focused on running away from something.
Right.
So you made this decision that you wanted to leave academia. You decided maybe you wanted to get into instructional design. How did you put that into action to really focus on what you're running towards? What was some of the things that you did to make that happen for yourself?
So one of the first things that I did, I didn't know that I wanted to go into instructional design right away. That was all part of my journey. I knew that
Hmm.
I was I call it escaping to and escaping from.
Yeah.
I wanted to escape from that world that I had been in for 20 years. I was ready to leave that, but I didn't really know what I wanted to escape to. And
Sure.
so I, worked with a therapist. I worked with a coach, a career coach, to really get clear. And that was about a year before the pandemic started.
Oh,
That
wow.
then sort of that was the pandemic was the moment where I was able to, you know, sever my ties and then move forward with moving into instructional design. But it was really a lot of work with a therapist and a career coach who was helping me work through letting go of the baggage that I was dragging around, because that's really important. You got to let go of all before you can even figure out where you want to go next
Hmm.
in your journey. And so, letting go of all of that, and then looking at what it is that you want to do, and what's going to be meaningful for you and meaningful for your life in a productive way. And so it was that year-long process that, and just struggling back and forth, because everyone's journey is going to be different. I mean, some people are going to be able to, like, 3 months, boom, I've made the transition. Here we go. I'm rocking and rolling. For me, I think the process was just a lot slower than that, which is okay. I mean, everybody
Yeah.
needs to experience it in their own way.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think one of the things I think more people need to be saying out loud is that whether you're transitioning from teaching into instructional design or e-learning, or academia into corporate instructional design, or whatever it might be, it's a process and it takes time. It's not you built a portfolio overnight and now you're an instructional designer getting hired. There's going to be hiccups and lessons learned along the way, and your definition of what you're running towards probably changes along the way as well.
Yeah, it does. I mean, you know what you're escaping from. I mean, you can
Hmm.
clearly define that, all the things, but escaping to, that's where you've got to really figure out, well, what kind of life and what kind of experiences do you want to create, make for yourself, that's going to be satisfying, that's going to be life-giving, that's going to be meaningful for you. And so that does change, because you could all of a sudden get into a situation where you realize, I thought that I liked working, let's say, remotely. Like I thought I might like to work remotely, but actually I like being around people and bouncing ideas and that, one-on-one or group dynamic that I just can't get through the sort of remote experience. I mean, that's just one example. So,
yeah. Well, I think part of it too is the going back to what I was saying about like rewiring your brain and rethinking your career. So many people, I think, not assume, but they go into adulthood, they leave college and get into their career with this idea that a career is a linear thing. Maybe it's linear that goes upwards, and you stay in that thing forever, or you stay at that company forever until you retire. And then the way I try to view my career is I view it in an S curve. So you start somewhere, you grow, you mature, and then eventually it plateaus. And what happens is that if you stay at that plateau, ultimately, even if it feels like it's horizontal, it's really declining because your skills atrophy, you become complacent, and then your career slowly dies. And just when that plateau happens, that's when you have to reinvent so that you can start a new S curve. And I can map, like for myself, I can map from when I was catching shoplifters to working in corporate America to working for a small e-learning development company to freelancing to then going back to corporate America and freelancing some more. I can see those different S curves in my career. And so there's nothing linear about your career, right? It changes. And even right now, like even as you're making the transition into instructional design and you're trying to figure out what you want, you're probably going through a lot of little S curves as you're iterating on what you want to be doing, right? Does that make sense?
It does. It makes total sense. And in fact, thinking about what you said is so true about when you're at the peak of the S curve is when you should be thinking about, where your next steps are, as opposed to waiting for when you're all of a sudden now at the bottom of that. And, there are so many times where I've said to myself, Jim, why didn't you, you saw this coming, or didn't you see this coming? You should have done X, Y, and Z, shoulda, woulda, coulda, right?
Yeah, right.
About it all. But that's so true. I mean, that's a lesson that I wish I had learned a long time ago, because I don't know that I would be maybe where I am right now in this process. Maybe I would have stumbled upon it, 10, 15 years ago and then said, wow, that's really what I wanted to do, and made the change then. But, it's like, who was it? Someone said, there's someone who said, you don't have to get ready if you stay ready. So, and so, so I get the part. Yeah. You don't have to get ready if you stay ready.
Yeah. I think, the challenge with understanding your career as a S curve too is, to your point, like paying attention to where you're at on the S curve. I mean, for me, one of the things that I try to do, and it's something I'm learning to do all the time, but I try, like for myself, I am like already thinking about the next S curve and the S curve after that for myself. That's hard because you're trying to think into the future. But I think the big thing for people is to realize that only you as the individual can make that happen. No boss, no company, nobody's going to figure out when it's time for you to make the leap and start growing in some other direction. You really have to take control and ownership of that. And usually, to going full circle back to our where we talked, that slow drip that becomes the waterfall falling on your head. If the waterfall's falling on your head, it's, not that it's too late, but you probably waited too long,
Yeah, no, that's true. And again, that's just where you are, in your journey. And I think you're going back to a point that you made is so true. There's that old idea, which, I mean, it was a reality maybe for my parents who are in their, 90s, who, I mean, my father worked for, all those years for IBM and retired from there, and then worked for, another short period for another company, but he always worked the same kind of thing. And he retired, with pensions and security of all that. I mean, that went away in the 80s, and so you're so right about how that's a myth now, that because you're going to have to reinvent yourself over and over and over again, and that's okay. That's just the reality of what we're in right now, the milieu that we're in right now.
Well, yeah, and I think I remember I was mentoring. This was years ago. I was mentoring somebody when I was still managing a team, and so many people go into. And this is less about academia. This is more career advice in general, I would say. But I was mentoring somebody, and one of the things that I challenged them to do was to really ask themselves why they were here at this particular company in that particular position. Why were they here? And usually, what people respond with is because like they want to do something great at that company, or they can offer this on that team. And I'm like, no, 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 no. But what's it doing for you? You know, you're either, what's the reasons you're here and what are you getting out of this experience? And I think part of changing your perspective about how you take ownership in your career is every time you go to a job interview or you accept a job, you have to go, okay, what am I going to get? What am I going to gain from this experience? Because that experience is temporary. It's temporary. I remember I was talking with somebody the other week and they were not upset, but they were nervous about something going on at work and what it was. And I remember saying to them, I'm like, are you going to retire from this company? She's like, no, of course not. I'm like, yeah, you're going to have other jobs. This is temporary. If it's not serving you, then it's probably time to go. And I love this new saying I just saw on LinkedIn. There's only two reasons to stay at a job. You're either earning or you're learning. If neither's happening, it's time to go.
That's right.
You're
that is so
or
true.
learning. Yeah.
That is so true. Earning and learning. And I think, you know, that was something when you talked about, you know, atrophy in your career, that really happened for me. I wasn't learning anything new. I was, you know, rehashing so much of the same stuff that, I mean, I was learning some new things about the, you know, about the subject matter that I was teaching, but it still wasn't new. I wasn't learning something new. I was just adding to it.
And maybe what you were learning was what you didn't want to be doing. You know,
that's right.
Right. That forced you to leave or prompted you to leave. So, okay. So before we jump to some of the questions we have tons of questions coming in. Awesome. I want to know, so we talked a little bit about how career transitions aren't clean and simple. They're messy and probably emotional. And so where are you at right now in your career transition? And what are, as you think back on, as you do kind of a little retrospective on the last year or so, you know, what are some of the big things you've learned and how much is still ahead of you as you continue to make this transition?
Yeah. So right now I'm, you know, doing contract work in instructional design for various individuals and organizations. And, you know, I'm constantly connecting with individuals, you know, networking with people. I am continually defining and redefining myself in terms of, in one of my blog posts, I talk about code switching. It's a term we use in, you know, in language where, you know, you speak in, you know, you speak one way and then you might switch and speak in a different way, or you're bilingual. So you may talk to your grandmother in her native language that you can speak to, but then to your friends in a different way. And so that code switching for me, switching from the academia, you know, academic world into the business world, that code switching has been a difficult process for me, trying to let go of, you know, 30 plus years of being in education into now a whole new field that speaks the same in the same language. I mean, the words are still sort of the same, but they use just some different words around it. And so switching those codes back and forth. So I'm still working on that. And making that happen, and, you know, continuing to build my portfolio, build my experiences. And I will add another thing that, you know, I was really financially fortunate because I was at a place where, you know, I could leave the institution, get my, settlement, severance pay, what do you want to call it,
Mm-hmm.
which was really helpful. And so, financially, I've been able to take the time that, and I feel very fortunate. I want people to understand that, very fortunate that I've been able to do that. Not everyone has that. And I wish we could gift people more of that kind
Yeah.
of thing. But that's also, I think, played a big part in sort of my slowly moving into this. And I think the slow part for me was that I look back and made some decisions about moving career wise that I probably should have stopped and thought about a little more carefully before I jumped into them. But
Yeah.
once I jumped into them, then I was there, and where you go from there. Like when I moved into administration, I should have thought through that maybe a little more carefully, and maybe had been more willing to sort of back out of it earlier when I didn't think it was working out for me.
Because it feels good in the moment to be promoted or to move up in that construct of where you were working at the time, because it goes back to that's what you were taught, maybe, or that's what you thought was expected as an academic, is to move up that ladder, and so it goes back to constantly evaluating what you're getting out of that experience and how's that going to serve you in the long run. The last thing I'll add to that is there's this great saying that sometimes you got to do what you got to do until you get to do what you want to do. And,
Right.
I talk about, one of the things I talk about when I talk about making the transition into freelancing, I freelance full time. I've been doing that since 2019, but I've been freelancing part-time since 2013. And it took
Yeah.
me that long. It took me almost, and I was working on moving into freelancing long before that. It took me 10 years to go into freelancing full time. And so, when you hear stories or when people say, just quit your job and do this or do that, well, you're right. Some people, you can't do that. And
Right.
so what you have to do is you have to kind of take stock of your life and go, what are those obstacles that are in your way that are preventing you from doing what you really want to be doing? And for me, that was student loan debt and other forms of debt. And it took me, uh, 10 years and getting a good paying job managing people and being miserable for those 2.5 years and writing 2 editions of my book so that I could pay off all that debt so I could freelance full time. It's not simple. It takes time,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
No, and to that point, I would say one of the things you have to do is be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
And be kind to yourself and say, okay, right now, I know that I want to get over there, but it's going to take me some time because I have these responsibilities, I have these debts, I have these people that depend on me. And so it's going to take some time, but be kind to yourself about
Mhm.
that. Don't look at all the other people around you and think, well, he did it in 3 months or she did it like that.
Yeah.
You can't do that. So be kind to
Yeah.
yourself about it.
Yeah. I agree with that. Okay, good. Well, let's get to some of the questions. For those of
Okay.
you who have just joined us, don't forget to submit your questions. You can upvote on others. I'll go ahead and facilitate this. So our first question comes from Sarah. Hey, Sarah. Sarah wants to know, what tips do you have for teachers trying to revise their resumes for non-K through 12 or ID contexts? I know that's something you've been working on, Jim, for yourself.
Yes.
What advice would you give there?
Well, I have to give a shout out. I think my good friend Kathleen is
Yes,
in the
Kathleen.
group. She's really helped me. I'm really appreciative of that. And that's one of the pieces of advice I'm going to give you to everyone who is a part of the eLearning Academies community.
Mhm.
Use that community. We are here to support and to help you in any way. And so, one of the things that I had a difficult time doing, we talked about that code switching and that letting go of the past. I had a difficulty of letting go of my perceived, tweed jacket, bow tie,
Professor.
professorial world,
Yeah.
and Kathleen was really good. And when she looked at my recipe, she said, "Oh, it just smells of that world. It just, everything, the way you phrase it, the language around it." And so what I really did was I really dug into and looked and translated those experiences into the language that in fact, I know that individuals out there hiring you for instructional design, jobs where it's freelance or you're looking for a full-time ID experience, that career, that they need to hear it in a certain way. So you got to recast yourself. You have to reframe yourself. And part of that is, I had to take a 27-page CV and turn it into 2 pages.
Oh my God.
And what that meant was I had to let go of a lot of things. I mean, most of the things that were near and dear to me. There are so many things regarding publications and conference presentations and speeches and you name it that aren't even in there. What I did was I pulled out those moments in my teaching or my work experience that translated directly into instructional design.
Sure.
So I would say things like, if it was managing a large campus-wide project, then I would translate that into what it means to do this as an instructional designer on your team or with your company or your firm. So think about it that way. Try to get inside their heads and how they think. So read a ton of job descriptions. I did that. I looked LinkedIn, I looked at all the job descriptions and how they were phrasing things. I was looking at other people's resumes as well. I mean, how are they, talking about themselves? How are they, putting themselves out there? So I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, I have nothing to add. That was great, Jim. Good. All right. Our next question comes from, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name, Taina, or maybe it's just Tina with an A at the beginning. I'm not sure. Tina. I apologize if I got it wrong. Can you share 3 or at least 1 of the biggest challenges teachers may encounter when pivoting and how they can overcome them? Does teaching background matter? It kind of goes to the previous question. I'll jump in with this one first. I mean, going back to everything Jim said about code switching and the language you use and how you define your experience, I think the biggest challenge you encounter, in my experience, transitioning out of teaching, whatever level of teaching you might be teaching into corporate instructional design, is that for a lot of people who've never worked in teaching, never stepped in a classroom outside of when they were a student, right, wrong, or otherwise, their perception, this is especially true for K through 12 teachers, they just assume that you're just helping kids make macaroni art all day that gets hung on the parents' fridge. Obviously, that's not what you're doing, right? You're doing so much more. And so the challenge is redefining that experience, and whether that's saying, instead of saying lesson planning, saying curriculum development, or rather than faculty meeting, stakeholder meeting, little things like that. Sometimes it's the words you use, and it doesn't. I've heard some people online say, well, I shouldn't have to alter myself to, get this job. And like, you shouldn't have to alter yourself, but it's just the reality, that you have to change those words. I don't know. Anything else you would add to that, Jim?
Yeah, that's I agree with you on those points. I don't think that you're altering yourself. What you're doing is reframing what you know how to do and do very well as a teacher into the instructional design world. So, and look, coming from an elementary and middle school background, and then, working with, I've educated and trained and mentored hundreds of new teachers coming into the profession. And I can tell you that a kindergarten teacher is one of the best project managers, knows how to deal with lots of individuals, adult and otherwise, who they are incredible individuals. They're incredible teachers and warriors. So if that's been your experience, then translate all of that meaningful work into that language that instructional design, people who, and hiring you want to hear. Now, having said that, I will say, Tim, that one of the things that I have encountered over this past year or so, and especially from a lot of teachers moving transitioning into instructional design, is they'll say, we want experience in corporate ID, not in teaching. And that's difficult for us. That's
Yeah.
hard
Oh,
for us who are
sure.
trying to get our foot in the door. And so, being the teacher advocate that I am, and saying, I think that we have an opportunity here as educators, as teachers, as professors, whatever that is, but as teachers, we have a responsibility to teach the corporate world what it is that we do and the value that we bring to their organization and to the work that they want us to do. So let's think of it that way. I'd like to recast that conversation around, because we're teachers and we're good at teaching people things. So let's teach the corporate world what it is that we know and that we're capable of doing.
Yeah, I love that message.
I'll get off my soapbox about
No,
that.
I love that. And I think one of the bits of advice I've given people about interviewing is, one of the things I think people mistakenly do during an interview is they try to hide what they think the interviewer is going to perceive as their weaknesses, right? They try to compensate it or skirt around the issue. And one of the bits of advice I give people is, no, go head on and acknowledge your weaknesses, because what it does is it creates cognitive dissonance with the interviewer. And by you taking ownership of it and going, yeah, I don't have experience in corporate instructional design, but here's what I do have experience in, and here's how it applies. You're deflating the power out of that being an issue, because
Right.
you brought it up. Yeah,
exactly. And, if that is an issue for someone, then I doubt that you want to work at that organization.
Right. Yes, exactly.
That's not the space for you. And I think that's the other thing is, when you're making this career transition, you have to think carefully about, who do you want to work with? Where do you want to work? What kind of work environment and experience do you want to work in? I mean, that's really important. So if those individuals, they want to cast that aside and not really look at your teaching experience as being fruitful for the kind of work that you want to do here, then you probably don't want to work there.
Right. If they don't value what you bring to the table, then don't devalue yourself to fit into their mold. Because that's what you're doing. Eventually you're being devalued, whether you're doing it to yourself or they're doing it to you. I love that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Good. All right. And it was Tina, by the way. It was a typo. All right. I love this question from Mary. Mary wants to know, what's one asset you've taken from academia that has assisted you in making the transition into instructional design and e-learning?
Wow, finding one, that's going to be hard. That's a hard one. I think, I think the one asset for me was my experience managing large projects on the campus. I managed a large project that involved absolutely everyone on the campus, as well as stakeholders outside of the campus. And it was a large accreditation project, and it was built around improvement of student learning. Mm-hmm. So it really has a very instructional design focus to it, because we were designing, a program to address a real need that we had on campus. But it involved everyone. That was, one. So it's the project management piece. I managed when I was president of the Faculty Senate, I negotiated and managed large policy initiatives, both new policies and the revisions of old policies. So again, for me, I translate that into that's project management. That's being able to meet deadlines, negotiate with individuals, find common ground, build coalitions, all of that. And that to me translates well into instructional design.
Yeah, project management is project management is project management, regardless of what you're doing. So,
and I'm not certified in project management. So
no, nope, me neither. I almost wanted to go get my PMP once, but then I was too busy with projects to do it. So there you go.
Yeah.
All right. Good. Our next question comes from Brad. Hi, Brad. Brad wants to know, I've recently made the transition into instructional design and e-learning from K through 12 in higher ed. Congratulations, Brad. I don't have a robust portfolio at all. I have done a few things with companies, etc. To what degree am I allowed to use what I've created professionally in my portfolio, or do I need to create mock pieces? So before you jump in, Jim, I'll say this, the biggest thing, if you're using the work that you've done professionally, you want to make sure you have permission to use that in your portfolio in some capacity. Unless they've explicitly said that's okay, or maybe they explicitly told you that they shouldn't. I'm a big proponent of it's great when you can share actual client work or work, but when you can't, then mock examples can be just as or more effective in showcasing your skills. The example I always give people, I have two examples in my portfolio, one on dealing with angry customers and one on how to cook a turkey. And both of those are examples that I made during my free time. And I've won awards for both of those at conferences because they were so creative. And the power of creating your own examples, even if it's something as crazy as how to cook a turkey, you have complete creative freedom. You're not under the pressure of a subject matter expert or your company's branding guidelines. You can do whatever you want to do. And sometimes that better showcases what you're capable of than the boring compliance stuff that you create at work. Most of what we do at 9 to 5 isn't that revolutionary. So I'm a big proponent of creating your own examples. I don't know, Jim, I know you have a mix of examples on your portfolio. What's been your experience?
Yeah, so I do have a mix, but I will say the majority of what I have in there, what I continue to work on, are those sort of mock fictional company type examples, and I think that's okay because one of the things that I like to do, because right now I'm working on a project that came through sort of a challenge from, I believe it's your good friend, Tim North, who put out a challenge, who said, take this training manual, update it, you could create, and she gave a list of about 15 things that you could do with that. So I've been working on that piece. So I say that to say there are things out there, there are challenges, there are, design problems, there are all kinds of things that you can do to showcase a variety, but I wouldn't try to do like a variety of everything. Like, don't throw it all up on the wall and hope that it all sticks. Like, think about what it is that you really want to do and what you do well. I know that for myself, I'm a very good researcher and writer, and I like doing that aspect. And I'm okay and better than average, I think, with articulate storyline. I can do that. Graphic design is not my background, so I struggle with that, and so I know that that's an area for me that I constantly have to keep working on. But look for those challenges out there. See what people are doing, and maybe there's a training manual out there that's outdated that you could build something around, and then maybe share it with that organization. I'm a real big proponent of working with nonprofit organizations that you could engage with to maybe help them do some things that maybe they've never thought about before, that then could be used in your portfolio. So
yeah, I completely agree. I really like the point you made about how don't throw everything in your portfolio. Your portfolio isn't meant to be the body of your work. It's meant to be, I always tell people 3 things with your portfolio: what you really enjoy doing, what you're good at, and what you want to be hired for. Where those intersect, that's what goes on your portfolio, whether it's 1 example or 3 examples. That's kind of the golden place you want to be, and it might take time to figure that out. Don't put all of your stuff on your portfolio. Yeah, I like that. Good. All right. So our next question comes from Sarah. Sarah wants to know, do you advise teachers looking to transition to ID to create an online portfolio? Kind of what we were talking about. And if
Yes.
so, what are, yes, a simple
Yes.
answer. And what are the key elements? Do you have any recommendations for exemplar portfolios that we can check out? I do have an example, some examples. I'll put a link in chat, but Jim, you kick this one off. The answer is yes. And what are some of the elements you think goes into a good portfolio? And I'll pull up those portfolio examples.
Yeah. So this is something that I've struggled with because it goes back to the word experience, not having enough experience. You don't have the right experience. And I've been working on a blog post about the notion around experience and what we mean by that word. But it is, in terms of a portfolio, like I said, don't just build a whole bunch of stuff and throw it up there. At the same time, though, it feels like that we get, as teachers, we get this, and new in the transition into instructional design, that because we only have like 3 or 4 or 5 pieces, then that, I think, to some individuals out there translates to well, you don't have enough experience. And I use the yogurt aisle as an example. Sometimes it feels like my portfolio has to look like the yogurt aisle in the grocery store, but there's got to be 5,000.
I hate the yogurt aisle. Like, why are they constantly trying to reinvent yogurt?
How is that possible? So my first thing is, don't let your portfolio look like the yogurt aisle.
Yeah.
Go back to what Tim said earlier about, focusing on the things that that you're good at, that you can showcase. And also, be thoughtful about putting the process, documenting your process for how you developed these materials, and how this is being used, and what's the intended audience, and what did you struggle with, and what have you learned from it, and what are some reflections. I mean, I think those wonderful, all of those wonderful pieces helps individuals who are interested in hiring you see your process, see your thought process, and also see the range of your abilities and skills.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think some of the elements, and I put a link in chat for some of those e-learning portfolio examples. The biggest challenge I think folks have, and Jim, you and I talked about this when you were in the early stages of creating your portfolio, is that a portfolio, you have to almost kind of think of yourself as a product. You're a company or service, and what would you do if you were creating a website for that product or service? I'll give you some different examples. One of the things I see in portfolios a lot of times is you open up a portfolio and nobody knows what to put on the front page. So they'll say, welcome to my e-learning portfolio. Well, when you go to Apple's website, it doesn't say, welcome to our website. It says Apple. This is what Apple is, and this is what we offer. And so I tell people, put your name and state what you are, or at least what you're striving to be. Tim Slade, and I, if you go to mine, Tim Slade, I help people design beautiful e-learning. That's kind of like my tagline for myself as a product. And then I outline what services I offer. And the services are kind of those 3 things that I specialize in. I articulate storyline, visual design, video creation. Have a picture of yourself. People want to put a face to the name. And then to your point, Jim, when you're creating the actual portfolio, document, explain to the viewer what your process was, why that's in your portfolio, what did you create, what tools did you use, include screenshots. Again, think of it like as if you were creating a product page for yourself. And that can be hard because you're essentially having to talk about yourself in an unnatural way, and it can feel braggy to some people. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. And Tim and I, we've had this conversation before. I grew up being taught the idea that you don't brag, you don't talk about yourself. You should never do that. And so that was really hard for me to find that kind of voice, to put my brand out there. 2 things that happened for me when building my portfolio, and that was, Tim saw early iterations of my portfolio, which looked awful. My website, I mean, it was just truly awful.
I felt so bad.
I know.
I called your baby ugly.
It was ugly. It was really ugly.
I remember we had this call, and I remember giving Jim feedback, and it looked like he looked so you looked so discouraged, and I'm like, I don't think I'm gonna hear from Jim again.
I was crestfallen. I couldn't believe you called my baby ugly. No, it was the best thing that happened to me, because
thank you.
no, it really was. And that's, take people's feedback, not to heart, but take it to action. Take the feedback to action. So I did that, and I realized, well, I needed a nice picture of myself. So I spent the money and got a professional, set of photographs, and that was the thing that changed my portfolio. Then I had something to build around, and I had a look and a feel to it. The other thing I'll tell everyone, and I know our time is clicking away, but go get this book and read it, and also go to his website. It's StoryBrand by Donald Miller. StoryBrand, he's all about how to develop your brand and how to develop your story, but also how to develop your potential client's story so that you draw the clients to you. The story isn't really about you. It's about the client out there. But get that book, StoryBrand by Donald Miller. He has some great websites. You can also spend thousands and thousands of dollars attending to his workshops and all that. But he's got some free things out there that are very useful. His framework for how to put your portfolio or how to build your website really helped me in structuring my content and structuring my portfolio. So definitely use that.
Good. I'm putting a link to the book.
StoryBrand. It's just,
just put that in chat.
Awesome.
Yeah, for reference, I wasn't like, your portfolio sucks, Jim. I just don't want anyone to think that. I just think I was like, you got to do something here.
Yeah, this is not going to work. This is just...
Good. Okay. Okay, we're down to our last few minutes. So let me mention a couple of quick things. First, before I say adieu to, is it adieu? Is that how you say it? Say adieu. Goodbye. I don't know. Adieu to Jim. If you're watching this recording on YouTube, make sure to click that subscribe button below. And of course, if you want to learn more about growing your e-learning career, check out the eLearning Designers Academy at elearningacademy.io. And of course, feel free to join us inside the eLearning Designers community. It's a free community, and I'll put links down below. It's a great place, connect with other people in the industry, and we do all sorts of fun things there. So, and you can check out our schedule of future events. So feel free to check those out. Jim, thank you so much for joining today. It was a great conversation.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate all the questions we received. So where can people find you, Jim, if they want to connect with you online or follow you or ask you questions?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn at Jim McKinley Brown, and my website, jimmbrown.com. And connect with me there.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jim. And thank you everyone for joining. Bye.
Yes, and thank you, everyone.